Blaze News, the mandate day 58. I'm Jill Savage. Tonight on the agenda, President Trump met with Nayib Bukele, the president of El Salvador, at the Oval Office. And Bukele told Donald Trump that he has 350 million Americans to liberate from crime and terrorism. He also complimented Trump on his border policies. Watch.
Actually, what you're doing with the border is remarkable. It has dropped, 95%? It's incredible.
As of this morning, 99%, 99.1% to be exact.
Why are those numbers not in the media?
Well, they get out with the fake news, like CNN over here doesn't want to put them out because they don't like putting out good numbers. They only like putting out because I think they hate our country, actually.
Yeah,
but it's a shame. You're right. Isn't that a great question? Why doesn't the media? Why don't they put out numbers?
Yeah, 99%. I mean, it's crazy, right?
We're doing
it's a crazy turnaround.
Over the weekend, 11 violent illegal migrants, including 7 members of Tren de Aragua, were deported from the United States to El Salvador. And another was a member of MS-13. The others had previously been convicted of violent crimes, including rape, assault, terrorist threats, and robbery. DHS Secretary Kristi Noem weighed in on these deportations.
We should only have people in our country that love us, and the Border Patrol and our ICE officers and law enforcement officers have done fantastic work. So we're proud of them. Now we just need to get the criminals and murderers and rapists and dangerous gang members and terrorist organizations out of our country. So, Mr. President Bukele, we thank you very much.
AI supercomputers entirely in the United States. The company will build and test Blackwell chips in Arizona and Texas. President Trump commented on this investment and how it's tied to his tariffs.
Nvidia is so highly respected. And this was an announcement that a lot of people, I knew it was going to happen, but not to the extent that it happened. It's big. And the reason they did it is because of the election on November 5th and because of a thing called tariffs. As I say, the most beautiful word in the dictionary. After love, God, relationship.
Trump also took to Truth Social to vent about the war between Russia and Ukraine. He wrote, "The war between Russia and Ukraine is Biden's war, not mine. I had nothing to do with this war, but am working diligently to get the death and destruction to stop." The American military is also undergoing a revival. They put out this ad highlighting the importance of merit, which is a stark change from the past few years of DEI.
In the Department of Defense, excellence isn't given, it's earned. We are the world's greatest fighting force because we demand the best from ourselves every single day. We rise through the ranks based on merit, not privilege. Accountability, unwavering standards, and constant readiness are the cornerstones of our warrior ethos.
Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro's mansion was recently set on fire while he and his family slept inside. Police charged 38-year-old Cody Balmer in the attack and said that he admitted to harboring hatred towards Shapiro. Now, Governor Shapiro spoke out about the attack. Here's what he had to say.
This type of violence is not okay. This kind of violence is becoming far too common in our society. And I don't give a damn if it's coming from one particular side or the other, directed at one particular party or another, or one particular person or another. It is not okay. And it has to stop.
Now for some lighter news, President Trump announced he had a perfect physical exam last week. Watch.
So I think most of you have seen they released my physical. I did the physical on Friday, and I understand it was a very good report. The numbers were perfect, and I took a cognitive exam, and I would challenge anybody here to meet those marks because I have a perfect mark. Were you impressed by that?
I am impressed, and I'm not going to take that test.
But you're not that surprised, right?
No, not surprised at all.
You are. It's good.
And it's Holy Week, so the White House put out this message to commemorate it. This Holy Week, Melania and I join in prayer with Christians celebrating the crucifixion and resurrection of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, the living Son of God who conquered death, freed us from sin, and unlocked the gates of heaven for all of humanity. What a way to start off Monday here on Holy Week. Let's go ahead and bring in Editor-in-Chief Matthew Peterson. We go through and we just look at all of the different stories that are here happening. But let's go ahead and start with El Salvador, as we did right off the top there. How big is this that he's coming in and meeting with Donald Trump?
What's amazing about this is one of those things that if someone had told you 2 years ago that instead of being mocked by the leftist press here and being derided as a dictator, et cetera, the man who saved his country in El Salvador, Bukele would be coming here because he already has a partnership with us to take all the dangerous criminals that the Biden administration let into his country and lock them down. No one would have believed that. It's an amazing day. And really what it does is it puts egg on the face of the global establishment, because what Bukele has done is something that every leader potentially in South America could do. Every leader everywhere across the globe could do what he's done. And so highlighting him, developing that relationship is a remarkable thing.
And the latest in all of the tariff news, we get Nvidia coming here back to the United States, where they're going to produce the AI supercomputers out of Arizona and Texas. I wouldn't have believed this even just 1 or 2 years ago. If you said, oh, no, they're actually going to come through and move some of the manufacturing over here. I knew that they were trying to do that, trying to get some of the supercomputer chips over here. But for them to just say, okay, we're actually going to go even further and investing in America is a win for Donald Trump and these tariffs. Yeah,
as you well know, this is enormous. This is very important. It's vital for national security. And what it really shows is where there's a will, there's a way. If you have the political will to really bring back, everything here, to really reshore, you can find ways to make deals and get it done. And that's what's now happening. And it really is remarkable. We need a lot more of it. We can't let up, because it's going to take a long time to really bring everything back. But this is a sign of how serious this revival is.
Well, we'll have more on Holy Week a little bit later in the show. But when we come back, Chris Bedford will give us an update from the front lines of the trade war just ahead. Well, if you've been paying attention, you know that we talk about tariffs all the time, and they're just changing everything with the global economy. And there's the potential now that widespread inflation, if you tie that with the massive supply chain disruptions, we know it's weighing heavily on us all. But there is silver lining, and most of these people have missed this already. President Trump specifically has exempted gold and silver bullion from the sweeping tariffs. So when the new policies are going out and triggering the significant financial chaos, the administration has preserved your ability to diversify into precious metals. So if you're concerned about your savings, I encourage you to get a free consultation with Birch Gold Precious Metals Specialist. The first step is to text my name, Jill, to the number 989898, and you'll get a free, no obligation info kit on gold. And you can learn how to hold gold and silver in a tax-sheltered account. And Birch Gold will help you convert an existing IRA or 401k into a gold IRA with no money out of pocket. That's why you need to go look at Birch Gold. It's finally time to go look and do this. They have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. Thousands of happy customers. Be sure to text my name, Jill, to the number 989898. Again, text Jill to 989898 and claim your free info kit right now. The only war Donald Trump is launching during his presidency is the global trade war. He began the process of restoring American sovereignty with his aggressive tariffs. We all know that. But what else does he need to do? Well, Chris Bedford wrote about this in his Beltway brief. So he is the perfect person to break this down for us. So we know, Chris, that Donald Trump, he wants to be in a position of power, the art of the deal. So how can Donald Trump go through and actually wage a stronger trade war right now?
Well, that's the pull and tug right here with the president. Is he is someone who likes to get the best deal possible for the United States. The concern is that my concern is that he's willing to strike a deal with China at all, essentially. Now, China is a major problem, and I'm not one of those just random saber rattlers who likes to go out there and talk about how we need to commit American naval men to fight and die for Taiwan. But China has ripped off our economy, and with the help of a lot of America's ruling elites and our financial markets, it essentially helped gut the United States over the last 30 years, 40 years, or 30 years, our economy. I mean, the United States doesn't have a huge amount of exports. It's pretty small, but we have one major, massive export, and that's the U.S. dollar. And the scheme that we've come up with over the last couple of decades that has made the Wall Street a lot richer is that we print this paper, we send it abroad, and in response, these foreign countries, these slave states, these third world places with sweatshops send us back cheap stuff. And it seems like a great deal. People get richer. The dollar is the world currency. But the problem is with that stuff comes the dollars come back. Those foreign governments and those foreign people and those foreign entities don't just park it in their bank account. They buy things. And some of that stuff is good to buy, like treasuries. That helps us finance this insane system of outsourcing the United States to foreign countries in exchange for cheap stuff. That keeps the debt workable, essentially. But they also buy real estate, which is why housing prices have gone up so dramatically over the last couple decades. And it's unaffordable for a lot of young Americans, people to buy their first home in the first place. They buy into the stock market, which is why it's completely inflated. That's why Warren Buffett describes the stock market as inflated and not worth the amount of money that's actually in it. Excuse me, it's trying to kick me off of Skype here with the whole new changes. Warren Buffett even says that this is overvalued. It's also, it's kind of just gutted the way that the United States is able to do business, the way that the United States is able to operate. And the only way to really change that is to make it so that China can't do business with the United States at the same level that it has. And by doing that, you need tariffs. So if this trade war ends up coming out so that we just get a better deal and better access to Chinese markets, the ability to sell iPhones in China again, which is a big lie that Chinese have always said, hey, come into our country, we'll open up our markets. There's 1 billion people who are consumers. Just kidding, you can't sell here. We're going to pirate your tech. We're going to rip it off. We're going to hold you hostage. We're going to sell it to our people. But by the way, most of our people actually can't afford to buy any products. They're just workers. That's it. That was a big lie. So if they end up trying to just sell more iPhones, open up those markets, or sell more Teslas at a better tariff rate to China, that's not actually going to be the win that the United States needs to go forward generationally. I mean, it's a win as far as trade policy goes. The president could rightfully say, this is what I was going for, and this makes a big difference. But if you want to secure the future of the United States as a non-vassal state in 50 years, you need to actually start to change this. You need to reintroduce our industrial abilities within this country. You need to put tariffs on China. And I actually like the way that the trade policy has changed over the last week. The shock and awe of the beginning was a bit much. It brought a lot of people to the table. It's a good thing to actually walk it back, because the United States would suffer a great deal if we decided not to trade with every other country in the world without massive tariffs, where they could still trade with each other. We take an unreasonable amount of pain for that. And it allows us to try and set up what ought to have existed since the last 20, 30 years. Instead, we've had the World Trade Organization. What ought to have existed is that the United States takes its hegemony seriously and allows it to carve up zones of influence and trade influence, where we trade with other countries, starting with Canada, starting with Mexico, then Europe, Australia, the Anglosphere, and other parts of the world, in Asia and all around different markets. But we expect those countries to abide by our trade laws, which will include completely and totally isolating the criminals who run China. And if that's what he's going for, and that's where we start to get to, then this trade war will have made him one of the greatest presidents in American history, someone who will help secure the next century for the United States.
Well, let's hope that's the case. You know, as listening to you talk, I'm thinking I only have one example, just one anecdote of doing this, but it was a real one, negotiating with China negotiating with people from China over an entertainment deal, and it was like spectacular. Like all the stereotypical things you hear about with anyone who's business all happened in that one deal. So I'll just say Trump has his work cut out for them. This is not going to be easy. But let's talk about the United States for a minute, because you say in this piece, you mentioned a phrase that's music to my ears. I love saying it. I love shocking with people with it, and that is that a lot of the American economy is fake. It's fake. Yeah. And, you know, when you think about the reaction you get when you say that to people, it's not pleasant. And when you think about the ruling class that we have now and, you know, a lot of the boomers, great generation, they voted for Trump, but also some of them are very entrenched in their ways about this, the people in charge. How is it possible to, you know, to move things forward when these people are so entrenched and really don't know what you mean when you say the economy's fake?
I don't. I mean, I've literally fielded complaints from people who I love a great deal in that generation, who are successful, hardworking people you would call middle class, but they have multiple houses. I mean, that is kind of the norm of baby boomers in their 60s who at least achieved the middle class, is that they bought it into a market at a time when you could buy a house at an extremely affordable rate. Not the interest rates were higher, but the price of the house was significantly lower than what Americans have to deal with right now. And once you get your first home, you can build off of that. That wealth becomes successful. You can buy your next home. You can try to keep it. Well, take a loan off of it, et cetera. That first home is really your entryway into the middle class and the upper class, and that's why so many of these boomers are able to accomplish that. And they're going to take a hit. So this is important messaging the president has to get out there, is that the United States will probably take about a 20% hit to the stock market. And the stock market's massively overinflated, maybe 15%. Experts who I spoke to over last week disagree on the level. There will be some inflation. It would be short term, though. I mean, American exports to China are minimal, almost non-existent. And what we actually import from China would lead to more expensive back-to-school supplies, for example. Those baby outfits you have to buy, I'm currently buying like 3 a week, it seems like, for how fast she's growing, will become more expensive. Americans will have to make sacrifices. That sort of thing would need to be messaged. People say that the economy would probably settle back and get used to this sort of thing within a year. It would be not too dissimilar to the kind of shock therapy that Paul Volcker and Ronald Reagan ran on the economy when they came into a building recession after Jimmy Carter in 1981. And it was a dangerous game of chicken because they were heading straight toward the midterms, which is when Republicans and Democrats alike start to lose their nerve generally. They decided to do it. They went out in his first State of the Union address. Ronald Reagan directly took on what the United States was facing in this and the dangers it was going to pose to the United States and the hardship that was ahead and where we were going with it. And even though the recession was still ongoing, they were able to actually get through it. And he won a landslide re-election a few years later. President Trump has an opportunity, but he can't just be going out with 5 different messengers on 5 different shows, giving different ideas about what they want and what they'd like to say. And then him saying, we're going to do this, we're not going to do this, we're going to do this, and people getting squirmy, this and that. Listen, that may all be true, and I'm sure it is. But he needs to actually get the American people on board for why this is securing the future of the next generation, why this will be essential to their children. And it's a dangerous game because Xi Jinping is a dictator. And this is an existential crisis to him. His people can't buy stuff. He doesn't run an economy that's allowed that. Their giant, fake, controlled economy, though, does give them jobs, which is essential to civil order and a lack of unrest. Those factories are going dormant. Not all of them, but huge amounts are going dormant right now because there's such a major. They don't consume a lot of the stuff that they make in China. They send it out for other consumers, particularly their biggest customer, the United States. He knows this is an existential threat to his ability, his regime's ability to stay in power. So everyone is moving in the same direction, at least publicly, in China. In the United States, you've got a president who's giving some harsh medicine to the people. The people need to be brought on board. I think they absolutely could be. But the America's ruling elites and the guys in finance definitely won't. They're not interested in taking that hit. They're not interested in that cut. And that's going to be a difficult needle to thread. And it's going to rely on at least some really serious and diligent messaging from this administration.
I love how fired up you get about all of this. And I know that I'll just tell the people, because we were actually texting about this offline over the weekend, just the messaging and making sure that people actually know what to expect. Let's go ahead and put all the trade talk aside. And let's actually end with some highlights, or it's going to be the Lowlights podcast, because the Democrats have a new podcast for men. Let's take a look.
Globalists is a podcast about failure and how to overcome it. And on this show, you're going to hear us, two former White House speechwriters, talk to some of the best athletes about their worst moments and how they overcame them.
Okay, Chris, just take it away from there. I don't even need to set that up. Just take it from here.
Oh, man, I clicked that link on Friday and I sent it to you guys saying, we got to talk about this when I'm back on Monday because it's just perfect. So these two Kamala Harris staffers, they realize that they are not reaching men. The Democratic Party is not reaching men. So their plan is to start a podcast that highlights great failures by sports legends in American history, which could be like a cool thing. It could be a cool ESPN show to say, like, the time Babe Ruth completely failed, the time Michael Jordan completely failed, the drama, etc. But this thing's supposed to reach men. They're supposed to be about sports. Their first guest is that perennial loser from Texas who gets his butt kicked every few years in elections. Has nothing to do with sports that I'm aware of. And here's my favorite part. This is the kind of just the perfect mark of Democratic outreach to men. The podcast begins with one of the guys going, "Hey guys," and the other one just chirps in. I got news to you. Almost every man has already tuned you out. The conversation is over. The podcast is going off. If he put it on in the car, he is suddenly embarrassed unless he's driving a Subaru and hopes that no one around him ever heard it. And it got highlighted in Washington, D.C., Democrats, Kamala Harris staffers thinking that this is the way that they're going to reach men. Just gives me such happy feelings. I had such happy feelings going into the weekend. I feel good inside right now just thinking, wow, they're so lost. They're so lost. Even when they're told they're lost, they don't know how lost they are.
So I didn't even click that link. I was like, oh God, I'm not even gonna look at that. So that's the first time I've seen it, and it is hilarious. Between the voices and then when he gets to, this is gonna be about failure. I'm like, click, we're done.
Yeah.
We're done.
Yeah, see ya. They got the little opening graphics too. I also I guess there's a Boston Red Sox hat in there, and that's cool. I just don't even really trust those guys to talk like that, to talk about sports. I don't know.
I'm just waiting for them to see who paints their fingernails first, which one of the two men there, because that is now one of the big things that men do in sports. And I wish, as a former sports reporter, can we just stop with all of this craziness?
I think we need, remember when NPR, they all tested their testosterone and found out that they're all like dangerously low? I mean, I think maybe we should have a T test before you're allowed to start a podcast for men.
It's brutal. In order for me to listen to my Irish music or my bluegrass radio or any of the old time stuff, I have to put on different NPR affiliates. So I get them every now and then in commercial breaks, just softly lisping across the airwaves about the new threat about public beach access for trans youth of color. So, what are you talking? It's just incredible radio. It's truly an incredible view into a world that is so removed from reality. But you can't get enough of it.
Yeah, maybe we can get RFK Jr. out there just trying to figure out where all the men are at. Bedford, thanks so much.
See you tomorrow.
BlazeTV host Auron MacIntyre will explain why the trade war's success isn't measured in currency. Stay tuned. Frontier Magazine is back and better than ever. We have issue number 2, as shown here by the great Matthew Peterson, who's just he's just flipping through it right
really.
now. Beautiful imagery in that one.
Really amazing.
I love the cover. I can't get enough of it. When I look at all this, and we were actually out there, Peter Giedel, our friend, is he's behind the magazine. We were talking about all of the fun things that we actually have in store for issue number 3, but issue number 2 is the one that is out right now. And the only way to get it is to be a Blaze Unlimited member. So you can go through and get all the exclusives. There are VIP opportunities, there's dedicated customer support, and just VIP treatment all around. So go through and go to blazeunlimited.com/BNT. So you can get it right now. You can get issue 2 right now before we sell out. So if you actually do that at this point in time, you can also get the digital version of Issue 1, which is incredible. It was the one with all of the wild, wild west, basically, on the cover of Issue 1.
Yeah. Issue 1 was great. There's a great interview with Glenn about his museum. Mark Levin contributes a piece about why he likes MMA. It's all of these are jam-packed with interesting stuff. And it's more lifestyle, it's not dead-on political people yelling at you. It's about building a new future.
And you can get it at blazeunlimited.com/BNT. Go pick up issue number 2 of Frontier right now. It's pretty simple. Trade should work for America, not the other way around. But for way too long, we've let bad deals and global elites call the shots. BlazeTV host Auron MacIntyre wrote about how President Trump's approach to trade isn't just about dollars and cents. It's about putting American workers first and making sure that our economy serves us, not the global order. So he joins us right now. So Auron, thanks for coming on the show tonight. So how does Trump's trade agenda benefit the American citizens, right? Everybody out there is wondering, they see the headlines all the time. So what is it actually doing for the American people right now?
Well, obviously, for a lot of people, we see the offshoring of industries as something that is very dangerous. It takes away jobs that many people in the lower middle class were relying on to be able to climb the socioeconomic ladder. But more importantly, it also puts us in a position where we are mortgaging our national security for cheaper products. We discovered during COVID that places like China make a large percentage of our ventilators and our antibiotics, which matters quite a bit when you also find out that ultimately they're a place where a deadly disease came from that is destroying you during the pandemic. We also know that different processors that we need, semiconductors that we need to launch missiles in our military are primarily made in China. That's a wild move if ultimately you believe they are your most serious geopolitical threat. But we are not taking the security of our supply lines or the security of our economy seriously. Instead, we're maximizing profit and theoretical efficiency while ultimately leaving American workers and American security behind.
Auron, the interesting thing about this is that I feel as if prudence or the wisdom, political wisdom, which traditionally means the right thing at the right time in the right place, and stuff changes. The environment changes, the circumstances change. And so you have to change your policy or your approach. But in this case, the right really seems to be hindered by, let's call them, maybe those your words, free trade absolutists, or the sort of libertarian vibes that have been around the right for a long time, where the mentality seems to be free trade all the time, regardless of what that means, right? And that seems to be the problem on the right? Why there's so much friction. Do you agree? And if so, talk to us more about why that's the case.
So many people will talk about things like peace through strength, and that's understandable. You need to know that there are consequences for bad actions. You can't unilaterally disarm yourself and just expect everyone else to follow suit. And yet economically, that's exactly what the United States has done. We've declared ourselves free trade ideologues, adherents to this semi-religion that defines conservatism, and lower tariffs and trade barriers the only thing that matters. But of course, that's not the case. The reason we should want free trade is if it benefits the American people. This isn't our religion. This isn't our ideology. These aren't our principles. It's just an economic system. Now, if it's the best economic system and it benefits the United States and the people who live here, then we should embrace it. But if it isn't, or if there are some problems, or if we have to be willing to push back when other people abuse the system in order to make sure that it is working for the American people, then we should do that. Like you said, it's not about adhering to this as if it's a faith. This is ultimately a system that is made to serve us. And if it is the system that serves us best, then we should use it. But in the cases in which it's being exploited, which it very clearly is when it comes to relations with countries like China, we have to have a consequence. If we don't, then we're going to lose. That's exactly what we would expect in a military defense scenario. But for some reason, we act as if economics is somehow detached from this law of reality.
Well, it's funny when I just think about this, and it's like when you try and go through socialism and they say, oh, utopia, it's out there. You just haven't had the right socialism yet. Is there a place that you can get to where it is like the absolute free trade? It's actually going to work. It's going to be out there, and it is an attainable thing? Or is this more of the utopia that the leftists always try and just make a perfect scenario for?
You know, a lot of people who talk about free trade don't think about the context in which it was even explored. Ricardo, who is one of the key economists that many people cite when it comes to free trade, pointed out that there is this comparative advantage that ultimately comes from trade when people specialize. But even in his own understanding of the theory, he assumed that people would prefer their own nation to other nations and that they would make decisions based on that fact. He didn't understand the idea that capital or labor would be constantly moving, that companies would decide to just go ahead and pick up and abandon the workers and the people that they had been founded in to move to another country where things would be cheaper, or that mass immigration would bring down wages in an insane way. These were just simply not things that were considered when the idea of free trade was ultimately born. And so when we're looking at this, it's not that the underlying economics don't necessarily work, but they were set in a time and in history where other assumptions about the way that people prioritize national identity and national security were, you could just kind of take them for granted. Today, we have gotten rid of those ideas. The ideas that we should prefer our nation, prefer its security, prefer the well-being of its people have been abandoned in the idea that we should chase this free-flowing economic ideology. This is something that would have looked very foreign to Ricardo and many others who were understanding economics at the time. And so we need to remember that we're not attacking the underlying economic truths here. We're simply putting them in the context in which they made any sense in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, never mind the fact, of course, that America had tariffs for a long time. The founders certainly had no problem with them, and neither did post-Civil War. The American system, which was coming back now, people are talking about the sort of financial regime we had then when there was no income tax, something that interests all of us very much here at the show. And you can see Trump has even talked about that. But there's at least two arguments for tariffs. And we brought this up in a conversation. Chris Bedford was talking about it with us last week. And they can potentially, they're conflicting. And I'm curious what your take is, because one idea would be, look, we need to negotiate with these countries, right? So we level the playing field and we have something like free trade. The hilarious thing about the free trade absolutists is that we don't have free trade with these countries. So you put the tariff up there and they go, oh my gosh, we're going to get rid of our tariffs. Let's all just be equal, right? And then you actually have something akin to free trade. But of course, then there's also the problem of China and supporting China and countries like it, where you say, well, wait a minute, do we want China to come to the negotiating table and, to get down? Isn't that the exact opposite of what we want? In other words, do we want a long-lasting move into a tariff regime and to use these more frequently with countries, especially that aren't friendly? Or are we trying to negotiate with them all for the sake of a freer trade?
Yeah, and the difficulty here is this is a complex web of interactions, right? We had a highly specialized global economy in situations where production was spread all across the globe in different areas. There was never going to be a one-size-fits-all solution. Obviously, there are certain sectors we have to reindustrialize in. We have to make sure our supply lines are very secure when it comes to things like weapons manufacturing, when it comes to our own energy independence, our ability to feed ourselves. These are different aspects of our society that we absolutely have to have control of. We need to know that when we need antibiotics, we can get them on a regular basis, and we don't have to rely on our greatest geopolitical opponent ultimately to do that. However, we were probably never going to move every single bit of manufacturing back into the United States. That just was probably a never realizable goal. And so the mix here is to try to encourage and incentivize the reshoring of industries that are critical to our national security while providing the jobs and economic security that they would bring. But ultimately, we also need to bring a fairer deal when it comes to the countries that we absolutely have to trade with. And we want to make sure that we are trading with countries we can trust. Okay, maybe we can put a certain level of reliance on countries that are closer to us, but maybe we shouldn't allow a high level reliance on someone like China who's openly hostile. That seems like a pretty reasonable stance to take. We work with the trading partners we need to secure our supply lines on a regular basis, but we pull ourselves away from hostile powers that ultimately we cannot continue to be reliant on in the long term. I think that's a good mix, a good effort that we should make across the board.
So let's take this now back to Washington, D.C., because there's a lot of lawmakers out there on Capitol Hill. They're just saying, oh, Donald Trump shouldn't have the only say in this. We need to have our 2 cents in here as well. So what would you want to see at least the Republicans on Capitol Hill do with this?
I mean, it's really funny. A lot of people have spoken about the dangers of having Donald Trump be the only man who can ultimately make decisions when it comes to tariffs, or not ultimately, but have a high degree of unassisted input when it comes to that. Very strangely, these people aren't talking about the War Powers Act, right? Like, Congress has ceded a large amount of power to the administrative state and even to the executive branch. And one of the most dangerous powers that they've handed over is the ability to unilaterally basically make war without the consultation of Congress. If you're really interested in wrestling back some control from the executive branch and restoring constitutional governance, maybe we should stop with one of the most fundamental checks and balances that has ever existed in the United States Constitution and return the ability to declare war back to Congress where it belongs. That said, I'm okay with Congress taking a more leading role in this, but I really wish they'd prioritize the areas in which they would like to claw back the constitutional protections that we actually value.
Yeah, very interesting move by Congress. I mean, I kind of like seeing a little bit of energy from Congress, just something, some sign of life. You want power and to wield it? Interesting. Creatures of the administrative state as they are. But let's talk about the right, though, a little bit more, because it's been interesting to watch. Kevin Roberts was on the show, president of Heritage Foundation, and he came out in support of what the president was doing. Took a lot of flack for that. And all these old clowns like Jonah Goldberg and that crew, the National Review crowd, they're still whining about this and very up in arms about it. And there's a lot of people in D.C., frankly, who are very uncomfortable with what's going on. They're afraid to say it. Because it's very different than anything that's happened, in a long time when it comes to these sorts of issues. And this is one that hits people on the right. So do you think there's a ability to change here? I mean, certainly the Trump agenda, and most people support Trump. I think the voters are with him on this for trying it out. But is there any room for change on the right? Because these people, they don't seem to be receptive. It seems like there's a bunch of them that just... this is their faith. This is their religion. Do you think there's any chance that they might be converted?
As Machiavelli pointed out, the most dangerous thing for any leader to do, and the most glorious thing that any leader can do, is to introduce new modes and orders. When you have a situation where you're introducing a new system, this is always the case. You're going to have the people who used to benefit from the old system, they're going to be against you. And even the people who theoretically would benefit from the new system, they're going to be lukewarm in their support because ultimately they don't know how it's going to turn out, where it's going to land. The thing that makes you a leader, the thing that makes you decisive, the thing that makes you worthy of being in a position of power is ultimately being able to navigate that and able to instantiate an order that you think is going to benefit the American people. So I do think it's possible that when you start to see victories come in, when you see stalwart leadership from President Trump, that ultimately people might be on his side. But as with any system, there's always the possibility of failure. And so there are always going to be people who are sitting on the fence, waiting till the last minute, or even defending the system as it was, simply because they don't know what the new system will look like. That's understandable, that's predictable, but ultimately, if Donald Trump wants to be a leader and he wants to make the type of changes that he was elected to make, he's going to have to be able to lead without necessarily listening to the peanut gallery when it comes to complaints about what might be happening here. Now, he should still be prudential. He should still apply good judgment. That doesn't mean that if something stops working or it doesn't look like it's going to actually follow through, that he should continue to do it just for the sake of trying to be right. But ultimately, it's going to have to be his leadership and his decisiveness that drives this through. I wouldn't be looking for congressional Republicans to simply come along and say, yeah, we're going to brisk it all on Donald Trump. They've basically pushed him back against Trump at every level until they absolutely had to accept him. And I really don't think there's going to be any difference when it comes to tariffs.
I love that we went from Jonah Goldberg all the way to Machiavelli. Right there, just on the mandate. Auron, thanks so much for your time. We always appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Don't go anywhere. We'll kick off Holy Week with a special review of Angel Studios' King of Kings after this. Over the weekend, the King of Kings from Angel Studios broke records for the opening weekend for an animated biblical film. It took in over $19 million in its first 3 days in theaters. So take a look at the trailer.
The people are calling him king.
Then we turn the people against him.
Are you king of the Jews?
If it's what God wants, I'll accept it. And so should you.
So it did so well. Everybody online on my X feed was talking about it. So this was the X question today, is whether you've seen it or if you're planning to see it. Now, no planning to see it is the top vote getter at 70%. 9.5% of our audience says yes, that they've watched it. 19% said no, they're not going to. Maybe they'll wait for it to get out of theaters. But a huge weekend for a biblical-based film. You'll have to see it during Holy Week.
Oh yeah, people are ready for this. People want this, and this is the kind of content they're interested in. And God forbid Hollywood actually gives it to them, because they're not. And so anyone who steps up to the plate and starts providing something of just decent quality or more is going to win.
And our BlazeTV host, Steve Deace, actually wrote a review of it. He said on King of the Kings, I don't throw the term masterpiece around cavalierly, but if this isn't one of those, it's as close as you can get without being so. He said the bottom line is that this is the best presentation of the gospel for children I have ever seen. He goes on to just basically say this is one of the best things. And Steve is a very harsh movie critic. He has made films himself. He is not one to just go out there and throw compliments around. So I think that people can have that in the back of their mind, that this isn't just, the people on the left and Hollywood and all this saying this. No, this is our Steve Deace doing it.
Yeah, and one thing about Steve, he's going to tell you what he thinks. So he's not going to lie to you. So that is what he truly thinks, which is good to know.
Yeah, and everybody was saying that they had a kind of a hard time getting tickets because so many people bought tickets ahead of time. So if that's a plan for you, you can go ahead and go to angel.com/Jill and get tickets now for that. But I want to finish out the show because there are so many things that we have been talking about just offline recently. And one of them was making sure that people were aligned and moving to red states and doing the things that we all know in our minds that people have talked about. And it feels like they have done and taken steps. People are moving forward to try and take this country back.
Yeah, I was just thinking this morning, 4 years ago, I wrote and then I did this. I tell you what I'm going to do and then I do it. And I wrote that the only way out of this mess, remember the mess we were in 2021? Remember how crazy it was? The whole world seemed to be, falling apart in many ways. And the only way out was economic alignment, like starting to buy products and services and starting to think economically with political alignment, right? So aligning your values with your dollars was number one. And number two was moving to red states and actually getting involved in state and local politics. And, I certainly started to do both those things, moved to Texas with my family and I got involved in local politics, helping to keep Texas, et cetera. I think that millions of people did to do this, right? We know that lots of people left, lots of people migrated. And when it comes to their dollars, you can see what's happened to Hollywood. People they are not going to the trash that's on offer. They'd prefer an alternative like King and King. So we've kind of left that like emergency time, a sort of like crisis time. And now it's about moving forward and actually building larger structures, larger businesses, and you can see this thing starting to take off. I see it all over the place now. When it comes to the manufacturing, bringing that back, when it comes to bringing innovation back, you can see this movement sort of, moving forward. People are getting more used to doing it. But it's not over, right? It just started in the last 5 years or so where people started to catch on. We really have to change our way of life in some way. And you're all doing it. You can see people have really taken those steps. And now we need, to actually get rid of, I would say people like Cornyn in Texas and replace him with a senator who's better. These states are reddening. Texas and Florida have gotten more red, not less, since 2020. And so, it's the pressure is there. But now it's the time to really, let's take that Senate seat, right? Let's make that King of Kings movie, right? Now's the time to really build the movement into something that lasts, into structures that last. And so you can see this in some ways in politics with a place like the Heritage Foundation, for instance. Kevin Roberts coming out supporting Trump's tariff plan. That's huge for that organization and for the right. So there's sort of an organization that's been captured and hopefully is moving in the right direction. But there's also new figures like Auron Cass, who Chris Bedford interviewed recently, who's been, a pal in this part of the new right for a while pushing. And now all of a sudden, right, his time has come. He's ascending. So there's going to be need we can't stop, right? We can't stop. But looking back, we've come a long way. And I think that the right is really, we should pat ourselves on the back a little bit. People have changed their behavior. But the next step is really to build lasting new structures. Same with the universities, right? I mean, we're attacking their universities right now. Trump is doing so. He's taken away hundreds of millions of dollars from these places that are misusing this money. That's great. But we're still going to need colleges somewhere for our kids that are decent, right? So the building is there's still building to do, but we've come a long way.
Yeah, and if you look, one of my favorite finance guys is a guy named Luke Groman. If you look at where American manufacturing has left overseas and you overlay that with the deaths from all of the drug overdoses, he says it's basically the same map. So this is more than just, the manufacturing has been shipped over to Vietnam or China. No, this is impacting people's wellness, people's lives, because they didn't have the hope. They didn't know where their next job was going to be, and they turned to something that was not good for them.
Yeah, so in that case, too, you can see, have we made progress? Yes, we're getting rid of a lot of illegals and criminals, et cetera, and that's going to help the job market for everyone here who's a citizen, even people in these places, right? So that's good. But do we have the manufacturing back yet? No. But do you see a movement to do that? People actually practically taking that step, making manufacturing cool again, making factory making cool again, figuring out ways to do it in which it'll actually work for the future with automation and decent jobs. Yes. So, there's progress, but to actually get there, we want these places to be healthy and thriving, and we want to help Americans who, aren't doing so well to turn their lives around. And the answer isn't, of course, the answer it was in the past, no, we're just gonna leave you to die. We're gonna, pay you some welfare and let you die, and then we're gonna ship the jobs over here to slave labor. No. So we're starting to stop that, right? But the next step, there's still a lot of work to do, and that's exciting. It's a good time to be alive.
This is such a huge moment in history because if you look at everything, Glenn always talks about it, we're going to be moving into AI. Jobs are going to be taken over. You have to at least get some of the companies thinking about reshoring jobs here in America before that's all just done and taken over. And okay, they'll never actually come back.
Yeah. And it is very important. Obviously, control over AI is important for national security and everything else, but there's going to be a transition period, right? And so that's going to be rough regardless. And right now, we just have to take care of our own people. So where there's a political will, there's a way. People have moved. They have started to make decisions economically that align with their values. And the more we do that, the better.
You see it in D.C. Everybody's trying to get it on the state and local level because that has the biggest impact in your life. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you back here tomorrow night.